I'm going to start us off today, and as Sean said, my name is Hillary Wentworth, and I've been with Walden for about 7 years. And what I do is teach students in the Academic Skills Center. I teach writing and APA courses, and I also manage the graduate writing courses that are part of the Academic Skills Center as well. I live in southern New Hampshire right now, and in terms of reading, I consider myself an avid reader. I love reading some types of reading more than others. So I don't love academic reading, but I understand and appreciate it. I understand its place in my knowledge. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today is kind of getting an appreciation for academic reading and also effective ways to make it a little bit easier on ourselves. So the learning objectives today are to reflect on our reading successes and challenges, identify strategies to address challenges of comprehension and speed, examine approaches to reading a research article specifically, and access resources for further learning. So both Dr. Inkpen and I will be guiding you through all of these topics today. Now, I want to hear from you as a way to begin our presentation. What aspect of reading do you find most enjoyable? And then what aspect of reading do you find most challenging? So you can address both of these questions or just one of them, but reflect on those questions and then type in the chat box what your answer would be. Okay, so we have some folks saying that boredom is a challenge, maintaining focus, really being interested in what I'm reading. And Luann says it's enjoyable to learn new information, but it's challenging to follow the flow of some academic writing. And I certainly relate to that. We want the information, but we want it presented to us in the clearest possible way. And sometimes, especially with research articles, it's not always in a logical format, or the writer is not always thinking about the reader and how the reader will experience the information. And so it can be a challenge to us. And the vocabulary can be difficult, as Robin says. Others are mentioning distractions. Okay, this is great because a lot of those challenges are points that we are going to talk about in this presentation today. Okay, some are saying that the reading is very slow because of the need to reread and also to take notes while reading, so that lengthens the time spent on each piece. And then some are saying that they enjoy reading scholarly pieces in certain sections of an article because they're presented well and the editors might make them readable. So yeah, that's what we want to strive for here is an enjoyment or at least not a phobia about reading. Okay, thank you for your contributions there. And we'll revisit those challenges later on in the presentation. So as I continue to go through these slides, be thinking about how you could address the challenges that you have identified. So first, I just want to kind of step back and say that all reading is not created equal, right? You might enjoy reading novels or reading for pleasure just on the side, but academic reading is tough, it's complex, the materials are not always written in the clearest or most user-friendly manner, as many of you have mentioned. So even if you are an excellent reader of, in particular, maybe mysteries, you might find academic reading more challenging, and that's because it's a different experience. So I just want to acknowledge that right away. We'll start off by discussing some general strategies for improving comprehension and speed. So comprehension refers to your understanding of what you read. And three main areas feed into that comprehension. Those areas are first, your vocabulary proficiency, second, your familiarity with the background or the concepts on the topic, and finally, your skill in decoding the content of the reading itself. Vocabulary. You can only understand information if you understand the words being used, right? I suggest that if you're reading an online article, for example, you keep a tab open to Merriam-Webster's online dictionary. Type in any word that you don't know to get a basic definition. Read this definition and then reread the sentence, replacing the word with the definition. On the other hand, if there are words that you sort of know, but you're not completely confident in that understanding, you can often figure them out based on the context. So examine the phrases before and after the word you don't know, and also the next sentence that comes in the article or reading. So from that next sentence and those context clues surrounding the word, do you get a sense of what the word means now that you're looking more closely at that surrounding material? So that's a way, if you're kind of on the fence of, do I really know what's being said here, is to read more in the article itself to get a grasp of what that word means. Okay, background and concepts. When we approach a reading, we come to it with some basic knowledge on the subject, and we access that and we build on it as we're reading. But occasionally we might end up reading above our level of understanding on a certain subject. And in these cases, we don't have that background to draw from, so it can be more difficult. For example, you might be thrown into a course where maybe you're assigned a reading passage on treatment approaches for schizophrenia when you're not entirely sure you understand schizophrenia as an illness. So that's a problem, right? You can't really buy into understanding the treatment if you don't understand the illness that would be targeted with that treatment. Or maybe you're reading a complex research article on a business model, and that business model involves a foundational leadership theory, but you've never heard of that theory. So you do need to do additional kind of research to get up to speed in terms of that theory. In these cases, it's important to do additional reading in order to increase your knowledge base. The extra reading might mean Googling the concept you are unfamiliar with to find information, or it might mean skimming an introductory textbook or an encyclopedia. This is where I like to put in a plug for Wikipedia. And I know Wikipedia, uh, it's bad to even kind of mention that term because you don't want to rely on it when you're writing your papers or for scholarly evidence if you're trying to convince someone of an argument, but it can help you in understanding a concept, or it can give you a general overview so that you can dig deeper into a more scholarly reading. The third point here is probably something you don't want to hear because we're trying to discuss strategies to read more efficiently, but essentially you'll want to read more on the topic in order to get that background. As you read more and more and more, you'll become more versed in the terminology, the history, and the concepts of a field, which will make the next time you read on that subject that much easier. So what I'm saying here with this third point is to give yourself time to expose yourself to more information from the field, and this will improve your reading experience. Okay, now we have our third aspect that affects comprehension, and that is content. And I'm sure we've all been in the situation where we read something once through and then we say, wait a minute, what did I just read? Or we read a page or a paragraph and say, what was that? Because we're focused on something else in our brain or there's some other distraction happening around us. And in these instances, we're probably just reading passively, taking the information in, but not really doing anything with it. So the strategies listed here all involve being an active reader rather than a passive reader. Active reading engages your brain and it forces your brain to answer questions and make connections, and that facilitates your understanding. So to be an active reader, you want to ask questions as you read and answer those questions in the notes you're taking. Some of you mentioned note taking earlier. So consider, do your notes answer your questions that you're having as you're going through your work? Summarize each paragraph or section in your own words. And this not only helps with your understanding, but eventually when you're writing about the reading that you're doing, if you're writing about that topic later on in an assignment, if you've already summarized each paragraph or section, then it's going to be easier to get started on your writing too. There are also a number of techniques and frameworks out there, such as SQ3R, you might have heard of, and the one listed on this slide is KWL, which stands for Know, Want to Know, and Learned. And how this works is before you get started reading a piece, you identify what you already know about the topic and what you want to know. Then afterward, you review what you learned. This is helpful in tapping into that prior knowledge and making you curious about the reading material. It can also help for those of you who perhaps don't feel a connection to what you're reading, you're not interested in it. Maybe using this framework would make you tie the information to something in your own life. So like using that, what do you want to know about this topic as a way to connect the topic to your own life, okay? All right, the final strategy here is to read aloud. This might help, especially with sections that you have identified as particularly important. Reading aloud can help you retain the information because you are both hearing it and seeing it. I know that this helps me. Uh, Sometimes I will read aloud to myself and it'll just be easier for me to recall that information later. Okay. And I know there are some questions in the chat box appearing. I'm going to pause later on at the end of this little segment, and then I'll address those, okay? Okay, for speed, we all want to read faster, right? This becomes especially important as you start to write lengthier research-based papers such as literature reviews, or maybe you're working on your master's or your doctoral capstone where you're having to read a lot of articles and you're drawing on a lot of sources. The first tip here is to minimize distractions as best you can. I know we can't eliminate all of these. We can't eliminate our children from our lives, right, while we're reading. And maybe we do have to take cell phone calls when they come in. But think about in your own life, how could you set aside a little bit of time so that your reading experience is a little bit better? Visualize your current setup for reading. What is that environment like? Are you constantly switching over to Facebook while you try to read? Do you have a quiet room? How can you make it more easier for you to get into that reading mindset? Second, always read with a purpose. Know why you are reading the particular source. Is it because you need evidence to support an argument? Is it because you're interested in the methodology the researchers used? Or is it because you want to know how the theory was applied? What about the reading is going to be helpful for you? And reading with a purpose allows you to read faster because you can narrow your focus and tune out all that extraneous information that might be getting in the way of what you really want out of the reading. So you could skim over areas that are not all that effective for you and then do an in-depth read in the areas that will be helpful for you. Try to read in complete phrases rather than word by word and avoid pronouncing each word. Technically, this will allow you to read faster because your eyes work faster. Okay. You can also try a speed reading tool such as Spreed. And I'm interested if anyone has tried Spreed or another technology tool for speed reading, and you can go ahead and comment on your experience in the chat box. But how Spreed works is it isolates chunks of the text and plays them for you at a certain speed that you can manipulate. So the words come at you in that isolated format so that you can digest them a little bit faster. Okay, the next part of the presentation is on reading research articles specifically. The first 2 points on this slide go hand in hand. You need to know your purpose for the reading. What are you looking for? Knowing that purpose will allow you to narrow down and focus your reading. So you might be able to skim certain areas and read others more in depth. In order to predict which sections will give you the information you need, you of course need to know what each section contains. And the good news here is that all research articles have a similar format. so you know what to look for in each section. And you can click on the link on this slide to see an article on what each function of a research article is. So what is the function of the introduction, the abstract, the discussion section, the conclusions, that kind of thing. So I'm going to discuss a method for reading a research article that I call the dip your toe approach. And then later on, Dr. Inkpen is going to discuss another method. And my method, I believe, is helpful if you're unsure that an article is going to be useful to you and you don't know if you should really read the whole thing. Okay, so here's the dip your toe approach. The reasoning behind this method is to get a sense of what the article is about before you're really fully committing to reading it. So at first you'll just look at the title. What do you think the article is about based on the title? Then you can go ahead and read the abstract, which should provide a brief summary, maybe one paragraph of the research study. The key words beneath the abstract give you an idea of the important concepts in the article. So based on this surface level information, do you want to learn more? Is it going to serve your purposes? If so, you can move on to the actual contents of the article, first reading the opening of the discussion section. This opening usually includes a succinct statement about the results and how the researchers are interpreting those results. Then you can read the full discussion and results sections. Again, these are areas that give you an understanding of the outcome of the study, what actually was found from that study. If that outcome meets your purposes, you can go ahead and dive into the article. So go ahead and read the introduction. Now that you understand the results of the study, you can have more of an appreciation for the background going into it. As you're reading, pay attention to the headings and the first sentences. The first sentences of each section or paragraph are usually the topic sentences that establish the main idea. So it's important to look at those because they can give you a good idea of what the topics are as you go along. They can be kind of signposts to you where you would focus in on that first sentence, but maybe skim the rest of the paragraph if it's not something that you need to read deeply. Okay, so this is just one approach to reading research articles. And I'm going to pause here, and I know there's been a lot of activity in the chat box, so I am going to actually go ahead and ask Sean if you can read me any relevant questions that have come in that I should address.
I'm not sure if this was addressed directly or not, but somebody asked about what context clues means, or what are study context clues. I apologize if you already mentioned that in the presentation, but I want to point that out. That one came through.
Sure. Context clues are just the surrounding material you have of a word maybe that you don't understand, a vocabulary word or terminology from a research article, and you would read the rest of the sentence and the previous sentence and the next sentence to get a feel for what does that word mean based on what the rest of the sentence is saying. So you can maybe fill the gap in your understanding by reading the surrounding material. That's just what that means. And that would be useful for something where you kind of know what a word means, but you're not entirely sure. So instead of looking it up, you could kind of try to figure out based on what the rest of the sentence is saying.
Someone also asked what you mean by limiting the pronouncing in your head and performing the dip your toe in approach.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so limit pronouncing in your head. That was just a way to increase the speed of your reading. So if you're focused on, I want to read faster rather than I have trouble with comprehension, this would be an approach for reading faster, would be limiting trying to pronounce in your head or even verbalize uh, by reading the work aloud. Okay, I presented reading aloud as a way to help with your comprehension. So if there's something that you don't understand, you would read aloud. But if you want to read faster and you're really understanding what you're reading anyway, you would avoid that approach. So some of these approaches kind of clash with each other. So it's really important to know what your challenges are and what approaches are best to cover those challenges.
One last question I find in here is someone asking is how effective is using find in zooming on the topic that is important to you? I mean, the find feature, I mean, control F, I imagine.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but I'm sure yeah, you can use that. Yeah. So if you have an article in front of you, doing Command F or Control F to find a particular word, maybe it's a keyword that you are looking for in your research, and go ahead and find instances of that in the text. You can do that. The only problem with that is that maybe you're not getting the full context in which that word is being used. You're just getting a small nugget of it. So you might need to do a little bit more reading. All right, I do see one more sentence or one more question here. If you use a supplemental resource to help you understand a scholarly resource like Wikipedia, do you just cite the resource or do you cite both of the resources? Right, you would just cite the one that you are actually using in your writing. So in that case, if you used Wikipedia for background on a theory or something, um, you would not cite that in your writing. You would just cite the scholarly source that discusses the theory. And if we have failed to address your question, you can just type it again, and there will be more times for question at the end. So I'm sorry if I've missed you. Okay, Dr. Inkpen, I'm going to hand it over for you for another approach to reading research articles.
Thank you, Hillary. Well, I'm making a big guess here that people probably are not reading statistics on a pleasurable base, and but it's so required on research that without reading it with a critical eye, the research or skipping it, which has been shown that many times when people are reading an article with graphs or charts or statistics in it, that they actually skip that part. And um, well, that could be very detrimental to what you get out of the article and also for your own ability to write good research questions and match the method and evidence well and the conclusion. So I see it as once you're into academia, and especially at the doctoral level, that your ability to read and understand research is part of your job. And so professional development or just being able to understand research is going on all the time and things are always changing. And for you not to be able to understand, whether you understand the basic statistics that have come up with the conclusion, it's whether you can match what I call the three circles. And I see them linked as they are here, the research question with the method and evidence and the conclusion. And if you can't do that, either it's a bad article or you've missed something. So again, if you want to put a question in, that's fine. So the first part is the research question. And I know that always takes a very long time, but it's very clearly written in all the articles that you will be reading. And you need to understand whether it's qualitative or quantitative. Uh, both, both methods are going to require well thought out research question, understanding the context and the purpose, and what did the researcher hope to find. This will also help you if you're going to cite it, if they're looking for something that you're interested in or will be uh, part of your academic paper. So there's just a couple of examples. Qualitative papers, how do teachers understand research when they read research articles? We're not thinking of gathering numbers or representing this in a way. We want to get the experiences from the teachers, maybe by interviews, um, maybe by questionnaires, open-ended questionnaires. Whereas the quantitative research, what is the relationship amongst gender, education, and age on social workers' salaries in Ontario. On that basis, we're basically looking for predictors, and this would actually be uh, statistical analysis. So what we want to know is does gender or education age predict these salaries? And each one of these, even though gender is not a number, each one of these can be quantified and then give the strength or how important each one of these are to salaries. I think that makes sense that we would understand what they were looking at to begin with. So whether you understand all the analysis done isn't as important as you understanding the research question. Uh, and basically, does the conclusion work on that? So once that section is done, there will be another section, like Hilary was saying, very clearly each of these articles have subtopics on when you write a research paper, like we did science experiments when we were in grade school, basically have the same thing. So once we've written the research paper, we're now interested in method and evidence. And so a description of the sample. And I would say by now, you need to be having a really critical eye, because does the sample that's chosen really match with the research question that you're looking for? Description of the analysis used, the statistical results from the data, does it all link to the research question? And, is the sample a good representation? I would say in real estate, we say the most important thing is location, location, location. And I would say in quantitative research, the most important thing is sample, sample, sample. That if the sample is biased in any way, no matter how good the research may be or the analysis may be on what you've picked up, if the sample falls apart, then the rest of the research will not hold any water. It's like having feet of clay, I would say. So then I can give examples of sample. You want to find something about a college, and you interview students in one class. So that will not be representative of the whole campus. It will only be maybe one major. Usually we try to have the sample representative of the whole by stratifying. So when you read the article, that should be what you're checking with. Is the sample large enough? If I'm going to talk about something that represents United States of America, I want to have a sample that's bigger than 50, so that I'm sure that I have covered as many areas as possible. And the conclusions here must really be linked to the research question. So if the research question is addressing, let's say if they want to interview students to see how they feel about the way the courses are delivered. So they have one class that is delivered by online, and they have another class doing face-to-face. And in the conclusion, we better be sure that our conclusion is only talking about the method of delivery. So for that same example, we would not want to conclude that if the students liked face-to-face, that those students learned more. Because the experience, or what we were looking for, was how they enjoyed the medium. We didn't ask or we didn't test to see how well they did. Was it coherent? Was it easy to follow? So again, when it comes to a conclusion, we can't surprise the reader by concluding the students that had the face-to-face environment are better statisticians than those students that were online, when what we were testing for was to see how they enjoyed the medium, not how well they did in statistics. So I'm saying that your critical eye must travel along the article, and just because it's being published or it's in a research article does not mean that it's perfect. And that I believe that the more you do on reading and tying these three things together, the better you will get at setting up your own research, checking your sample, being sure that your conclusion is based. And that's not even suggesting you know anything about the analysis, but just making sure, first of all, that it all holds together. Um, I'm not suggesting either that you don't know anything about statistics, because I love statistics. So again, I'm coming back to the critical eye, that if you cannot make these connections, if they don't make sense to you, um, then maybe there is something missing. So the research question, the hypotheses, we repeat the same thing when we do a research question. Uh, is there any relationship between gender, education, and salary? And when we finish, we need to be very clear that there is a relationship, and here's a model that we found from uh, using our statistical analysis. So begin with identifying the three links as a framework for understanding the research. And it also makes reading a lot quicker when you start. And I don't just mean read the abstract. I'm saying that you need to identify the research question, find the method and evidence that they've used, and tie the conclusion together. Um, I, I, I can't overemphasize how important that is when you're bombarded with lots of research in the topic that you're interested in. That if you can't make this thread work its way through, then I would move on, and until either you get good at tying the threads together, or you find articles that are really well put together, and it becomes second nature to you.
Hey Sarah, it's Sean. Somebody
Okay.
asked, for a scholarly article, are the items being discussed already given? Why would you analyze them while reading? Um, so it looks like for a scholarly where the items are being discussed already, why would you analyze them while reading? I don't know what section that was in or what uh,
Uh,
you.
okay, that's okay.
Okay.
Um, well, okay, they're a scholarly article, uh, and let's hope that everything is good. But I think that you need to have a critical eye, so that when you read what the research question is, that you can tie those three things together. So if someone were to say to you, what was this article about? If you can answer those three links, I would say that you have more than paraphrased or summarized or précised uh, the article. I guess I'm saying that just to accept that it's been done and is okay. All right, if you don't want to reread the statistical analysis, but that still doesn't stop you from making sure that the three links are put together. Was there more, Sean?
Yeah. So checking the sources of your sources, I guess, is the kind of one way of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's just good training for you as well. That I know that we really work hard at being succinct in our research questions when we set them up. And a good way of doing that is reading ones that have been well written, and see just how there should be no question about the analysis you need once you've written the research question, because they're all linked together.
And Denise is asking, I'm going to paraphrase what she wrote here, and the idea that if you read an article and there's limited research on a topic, and you read an article, but you're not citing it in the paper, but you read that article, so it's become part of your knowledge. Do you address that citation, or is that something you? Because a lot of us read articles, but we don't actually address them directly in the citation or in the research paper. How do we work with those articles?
Okay, I think that's really a Hillary answer, but I would, what I would say is that I would only include articles that I actually cited. So if it gave me knowledge and I wanted to include that knowledge in while I was writing, then I would cite it there.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
And somebody wrote about the feet of clay. Somewhere I saw
Yeah,
a
I thought
question
they
about
wanted
feet of clay.
a little extra explanation about that.
Okay, so you want to well, my example, if you wanted to get some understanding about, I teach in the Middle East, so let's say that I wanted to know something about the students that were at the college, and I only gave the questionnaire or the survey or the interviews to, let's say, one of my statistics classes. And I may find out some very rich things, but if I was to discuss students at post secondary or at community college level, um, those students are only representative uh, of people having to take statistics. So maybe they're only business students. So I would not have any information about IT students or engineers if they do not have to take statistics. So my sample is not representative of the whole. So even though I may have ended up doing some great statistics on it, it would not be transferable. I would be doing research on a statistics class at a community college in the Middle East. So you need to be very careful, or that, uh, well, let's go back to that. Let's assume that there were only women in the statistics class that I was doing. Uh, I would not have information on, well, almost half of the students there because he split. And just another point, you know, if you're trying to compare two groups or if you're wanting to find out the effects of, you know, immigrants and TB, for instance, uh, you know, be sure that you have both groups represented. You have the immigrants with TB and the immigrants without TB. Uh, when you're reading, you want to look and be sure that the people are represented and represented well. Even though the statistics looks after a lot of, uh, say, when the variances aren't equal or the sample sizes aren't equal, uh, we still have to be sure that we've sampled well. Just on a personal note, and I know that I won't have lots of people thinking the same thing, but for me, the whole statistics package just makes everything fit. You know, when I see it and uh, it's sort of like seeing it in numbers, seeing it in graphs, seeing it in words, just as a comfortable level for me. Maybe that's because I love statistics, uh, but but that hopefully on reading some good research, you know you will see that that for instance, if you were doing some sort of scatter graph, and the more you studied, the better your grade was, and I mean that's what you would expect. Or if you were comparing one year to the next where you had done an intervention, you would hope that there would be a positive slope. So, um, you know, I guess reading good research will help you appreciate the contribution of statistics rather than just numbers.
Thank you, Sarah.
If, okay, thank you.
Man, I think that's something that's really important because when we talk about reading, we don't just talk about reading articles, but we also talk about reading numbers and reading statistics as well. So thank you for that perspective. Uh, are we? Oh, we got a few more resources. You guys want to? There are a few more resources here. Did you guys want to share these with everyone?
Yep, I can take us through the slide. And I do want to address Robin's question about being unfamiliar with the terminology regarding research questions and statistics and whatnot. And one place that you can go is on this slide, Robin. It's the reading a research article. That will give you a rundown of what's included in each part of a research article that might help you as you're reading. And also, there's the Center for Research Quality that might have some introductory information on um, starting to think about what you will be doing in your own research. Maybe Sean, you can put the Center for Research Quality's uh, link into the chat box for her. That would be great. Or him, I suppose. Um, okay, so on this slide, we do have some Academic Skills Center resources for you to continue developing your reading skills. And the first 5 listed here are web pages with information on critical reading, which certainly relates to what Dr. Inkpen was talking about with coming to reading with a critical eye and asking questions and being skeptical about what is being put forth. Um, so being a critical reader is like reading actively, but it also involves evaluating what you read in terms of the credibility, the author's authority, and any potential bias that they might have brought into the research or writing process. Additional info here is on reading a research article, reading retention, speed reading, and vocabulary development for any of you who are interested in those areas. And then the final link is to the Advanced Reading Strategies course, which is currently a 6-week course that really guides you through different reading techniques in order to identify the main idea of a piece, determine an argument, evaluate a source, and so on. And so that one's beneficial to you if you would like to explore reading strategies in a course format.
I just got one tidbit that I used. I used my snipping tool that comes free in Windows. Uh, and when I would read an article, I would snip what I wanted out of it with the references because you can't keep it all. And I found originally I was reading and rereading so many articles. And so this way I would go through, snip what I needed out of it, and I kept a Word document growing and growing with good parts of good articles. So thank you to the snipping tool.
Great. Okay, we do have a final question here for you to think about. So, thinking back about what you identified as challenging about reading earlier on in the presentation, now, based on what we've presented here, what strategies or resources will you apply to address that challenge? So just reflect on, what you learned from this presentation, how you will apply it to your reading in the future. And you can go ahead and share in the chat area on the right side of the screen. Okay, so we do have some coming in. So not read every word in the article, try speed, look up words in the dictionary that you don't understand, using the snipping tool, and linking all 3 points together for the research, for better understanding of the research and how it comes together. Reading aloud so that you're more easily able to comprehend. That's great. Enrico, thanks. You'll have to warn your wife first. Yes, um, definitely, because they might think that you're talking to yourself. Reading aloud. Okay. Yeah, these are great. Shutting off my phone. Yeah, that can really do wonders just to have a quiet environment to read in.
I read an interesting research article that said in our natural state we are chaotic, and that when we used to read books, it took all our energy to keep ourselves calm and read, and that we're much happier when we're interfered with by the phone and social media. I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, now we also have practice evaluating what we read, which is definitely important. Okay, thank you for sharing what you're going to be working on as you read going forward. Okay, I think that brings us to the end.
And thank you for all for attending this presentation. I'll be ending the presentation in about 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you very much.